friends. Still working on getting a monitor up for everybody here. All right, getting there very soon. All right. I was broadcasting just a little while ago and had to jump off to meet with the lawn service. And I see that my sound let's try this. Oh, that may be better. I was having some bad clipping. Sorry about that. Now let's see if I talk louder. Is it going to get worse? It is. I'm trying to get my Facebook sound working well here. I think that's a little better. Thank you for your... Hello, Uncle. Thanks for joining us again today. And hello, Barbara. All the usual suspects. Thank you for checking in. And let's see who's watching on Facebook. Got a few seconds before it tells me. All right. So in my last broadcast, which got interrupted, I showed you a good way to cheat, one way to cheat. Now I'm back to where I'd rather be, which is no cheating, just because it's the thrill of, is that the right word? Of just trying to get the thing right just by looking. I can keenly feel in my brain that if I would do this all the time, I would really get better at this. That doesn't sound like a complaint. That I'm just saying, wow, I can almost feel my brain, so to speak, expanding in the last couple weeks. Okay, so I haven't looked at this particular portrait in several days. Maybe Friday was the last time. It was the last time I worked on the portraits was Friday, and I can't remember if I worked on this one at that time, but be that as it may, I am certainly seeing it with fresh eyes. And that's what I'm calling here the antidote for portrait blindness, is seeing it with fresh eyes. So all of a sudden I see now, oh, her whole head is too high up. Her chin, look at that, man, that's way off. How embarrassing. I say that in jest. I hope you understand that. So I'm not really that embarrassed. It's just, again, all part of the process. I'm using just a parallel. I'm using, where did the word parallel come from? Using a transparent, neutral, dark brown color. And I'm going to have to start using some kind of light flesh tone here in a minute to cover up my earlier marks. Now the next thing that I see very quickly, whoa, 2,000 plus postal workers have COVID-19. You're right, lice all the mail every day, I guess. Wow, I had wondered about that. But with Amazon, all the deliveries were getting to the house, you know? All right, the next thing I see is that the width of her arm. I've got it way too wide over here. So either I move her arm this way or move her body this way, but I also see that I've actually got her waist a little too narrow. By the way, speaking of waist a little too narrow, earlier today when I was doing something else, driving around, I thought of a good way to describe the sweet spot that I'm aiming for when I do portraits. This especially applies, of course, when I'm doing my normal, by the way, here, a little bit of Betty Edwards, drawing on the right side of the brain. Right now I'm trying to draw that negative shape. By the way, I didn't, for many people, Betty Edwards was just codifying or describing what many of us had already been doing. I refer to her not because I learned it from her, but because she just made it, popularized it, that of drawing negative shapes. All right, back to, I said I've come up with, I think, some terminology anyway to describe a sweet spot, the proper zone that I think many of us who are trying to do portraits, what we aim for in our portraits. We want to be flattering, quote unquote, but we don't want to be so flattering, in my opinion. We don't want to be so flattering that the customer realizes we've been flattering, with the possible exception with the guys, in my case with the groom. I don't mind too much if the groom recognizes that I gave him a trim, that is to say that I took 20 or 25 pounds off him. That doesn't bother me, and that's just, I don't know, I guess I'm old school, but I still believe that males and females are different. I have some evidence. I have some empirical evidence that is true. But anyway, be that as it may, I don't want to get into trouble here already. Males and females are different, and what you can do with a male portrait and what you can do with a female portrait are two different things. So with the female, like I'll finish. If the groom notices I took 25 pounds off him, that's an occasion for a good chuckle and a laugh and a wink, and I readily admit it. If, however, the bride, say, and of course this pertains to all women in general, and again, you could accuse me of being sexist, I suppose, but that's just goofy. As somebody who is trying to make a living often by doing portraits of men and women, this is not sexist, this is just good business. If I take, let's say, 20 or 25 pounds off, though, first of all, it's probably a mistake. It's a mistake to take that much off. But if I take so much off, so to speak, that the bride knows that, then I've overdone it. So here's the terminology. And it's not just about weight, it's everything. We want to be flattering in our portrayals of our portraits, to be funny, to speak a redundancy on purpose. We want to be flattering, but if we're so flattering that the client realizes we've been flattering, then we've overdone it. Does that make sense? And let me talk again, the related subject. I've said many times before that on the journey toward being able to do decent portraits, one of the mile markers toward that lofty, if I may speak so boldly, one of the mile markers on the way to that lofty height is you must be able to draw, or paint in this case, you must be able to draw a believable humanoid creature. That is to say, you must be able to draw a person, a standard person, or more specifically, a beautiful person, a standard, attractive human being. That's, if you don't have the ability to do that yet, then capturing a likeness is probably a little bit beyond your capability at this moment. So, and again, that's why we have to learn the human figure by rote. You have to learn the rules. You have to learn how long is the forearm and the upper arm and the legs? How long are the eggs? How long are the legs? And so forth on the neck and all that kind of stuff. So you do all that kind of work. And then when it comes to the face, you learn what is a standard face. In the course of doing that, you learn what is the standard, beautiful standard, if you will. I mean, that is the standard that you're learning when you are in fact studying, the basic, as I said, humanoid creature. Your goal is not to learn what I look like, because I am not the ideal standard. I was pretty cute when I was young. We'll let it go at that. But you need to learn the standard. Anyway, so things, for instance, everybody knows, I'm saying this as if everybody knows, but everybody knows that large eyes generally are regarded as more beautiful than small eyes, right? Generally speaking. And it's here I'm thinking especially of women, although in that case, in that particular case, the case is true for men as well as women. Everybody knows, again, I'm saying this as if everybody knows that longer eyelashes are generally, and fuller eyelashes are generally regarded as more beautiful, closer to the ideal. And all of these are just cultural ideals, and a lot of scientists have tried to explain, why we're drawn to some features and characteristics that we consider them beautiful. And frankly, a lot of their attempts are kind of like, it sounds to me like a long shot to me, but be that as it may. Every culture has its beauty markers. And so let's go, for instance, with the size of the eyeball. Size of the eye, not the eyeball, the size of the eye. So when you're doing a portrait, of course, first of all, you want to nail accurately. You want to be accurate, be correct. But within, let's say, if correct is anywhere from here to here, and I'm talking about, let's say, a 32nd or 64th of an inch, any part in there can be considered correct. You'd rather err on the side of an eye that is ever so slightly too large. Hang on just a second, let me check something. Yeah, the angle of this arm changes slightly. You'd rather have an eye that is ever so slightly too large. But if you make it so large that the viewer, or your client in this case, can tell that you made it too large, then you've overdone it. Does that make sense? So that's my terminology that I'm talking about, that I think I've come up with some verbiage. You want to be flattering, but if your client, in this case, can tell that you are flattering, then you've overdone it. So it's a very, very subtle. Now, even as I say that, I think, well, what about John Singer Sargent's women? I don't know. That's going back 100 years, and because some of his women were, famously 9 heads tall or something, I mean, they must have known that that was an exaggeration. They just must have known. But I don't know. I can't talk about the attitudes of 100 years ago. I know it's true for right now. Spray mail down, then wait till the next day and spray inside the mail. Wow, crazy world. Good word, though. That really makes sense. All right, now, I'm only going to work on this portrait for a few more minutes because if I stick with it too long, what happens? Class, what happens? I began to grow blind, right? The longer I work at it, the blinder I get. Now, for the last several minutes, I've been working on the dog, her body, her figure, and so forth. So I feel like I can probably come up here to her face. I feel like I'm still getting a distorted sound. Hello, Raven6. Good to see you again. Did you, by the way, were you on when I was talking about you earlier this afternoon? I hope you were. Because I assumed you were listening at the time. If you weren't, you need to go back and hear what I said about you. Just kind of funny. It wasn't important. It was just funny. Raven, good to have you back on board. Because I'm back on Facebook, right? You know I've been on YouTube for the last 2 years, right? I think you know. You know what? That's hair back there. Oh my goodness. Well, that explains a lot. Okay, I'm just going to try to very roughly roughen her face, so to speak. Roughly roughen her face. How's that for some kind of redundancy? This girl's name is Holly. I think it's Holly. Maybe it's not. I'm doing the painting for Holly. I dare not assume that this is her. Anyway, Holly, if you ever happen to be watching here, please do let me know. It's just fun to know what people's names are. Let me show you my palette just for a second. I spent not a long time, but between 5 and 10 minutes, maybe early this afternoon before I started broadcasting, just real quickly making up a hodgepodge of flesh tones, just so I don't have to waste so much time doing it. A lot of people, Frank Cavino, Daniel Green, and I'm sure many more, have a very elaborate, practice a very elaborate process of mixing up all of their, or most of their, perhaps I should say, most of their flesh tones before they even start painting. And I've played around with that practice. As you can see, I don't subscribe to it all the time, but it's a good concept, especially if you're painting a live model, because when you're doing a live model, you really want to have mercy on the person who's having to sit there, right? I did not mix up any teeth color, however, so let me remedy that real quickly. We zoomed in as far as we can go. No, let's zoom in some more so you guys can see as much as possible. Aha, I just saw a mistake already. All right, glad I caught myself. Okay, here it is. Here's something I've just learned in the last couple years from watching teachers online. It's this mistake that many of us accidentally fall into when we're doing portraits, live or from a photograph, either one. The term I heard was frontalization. Now that's obviously somebody made up that word, but it it's real obvious, it makes sense. It means, it refers to the tendency that most of us have. Like this face is a little bit more than 3/4 viewed away from us. Our tendency is to turn a face, as we render it, is to accidentally turn a face our direction, to frontalize it, to see it a little more from the front than is real. Does that make sense? I have discovered that it's not only frontalization, but it's also verticalization, the same principle. But in this case, the photograph shows me the girl's, do you see the angle of her eyes? Boy, it's very subtle. But I don't know if you can tell, holding my brush, it goes up at a slight angle. And yet when I rendered her a minute ago, I had it going straight across, almost down. So the, again, the mistake is called frontalizing, and it refers, it refers not only to accidentally turning the head this way, but to turning it this way, making it more vertical. I guess you could say that, verticalization. But I think the term frontalizing will fit for both. So I had just made that mistake. I'm glad I caught it. So in other words, this eyebrow is lower than I had it, and this eye, likewise, is lower. This eye is higher, this eye is lower. And the angle of her mouth, again, I accidentally made it as if we were viewing her essentially straight on. So I am very glad that I caught that. That would have been just a mistake that I would have had to fix later. I would have caught it later. That's a good way to describe this crazy process of doing portraits without any cheating. It's a business of catching your mistakes either sooner or later. Of course, the sooner you catch them, the better your portrait will be. The more quickly you'll achieve that elusive quality that we call likeness. And of course, that is exactly why very often we resort to cheating, tracing, gridding, projecting, measuring, whatever it may be, so we can get there more quickly. And when I was a freelance illustrator, I cheated like crazy. Of course, you had to. And I was developing other skills. It wasn't like, it wasn't like I was trashing my brain. I was learning other things, still seeing values and all kinds of texture and all kinds of other things. But essentially, when I was in that season of doing a lot of tracing, it did cause my skills to deteriorate. I think that's what it does for everybody. I remember I taught a class, a painting class, I think it was down in Florida a couple years ago. And I think, I'm trying to remember the details, I think I had told the students they can either do one of my photographs or bring one of their own. And when we got there and we're unpacking our stuff and beginning to paint, one of the men in the class had already selected his photograph and had done a very extensive grid in order to accurately render. Now, I'm not ridiculing him, not mocking him, please, I'm not being that harsh. But when I teach a painting class, one of the things I teach is this whole, how do you start a painting or drawing, how do you draw it to begin with? So that was part of the class. So he had kind of skipped over all that. But my heart, frankly, sort of went out to him because I kind of thought, oh, that's too bad. Yes, it's it's okay to do that, but you're not a very good drawer. I didn't say this to him. It's just what I thought. And the sad part is you're not going to become a good drawer. Now, again, you pick your battles carefully. There's a time to cheat, and there's a time not to cheat. But if any of you ever take a class from me, that's a time not to cheat, because we're going to talk about how you go about the business of rendering something by eye, if you will. But I was surprised at my own, if you will, internal response to that, which was a little bit of sadness, like, oh, that's too bad. I felt sorry for the guy because he wasn't going to get any better, at least that particular weekend. Oh, it's okay to cheat. It is. Just your skill. You're not developing that skill. The skill of drawing, if you're just relying on a cheater technique. All right, I think I've beat that subject to death. No doubt I'll say it again, but let's get on to other things. Let's get rid of her excessive double chin there. She's a very attractive young lady, so I don't have to do any tricks, coping, compensating. My only trick here is to try to capture the reality. By the way, the older you get, the more obvious the secret of beauty becomes more and more obvious the older you get. I don't know what it is. Where I sit, my stage of life right here, the secret of beauty is very simple. Be born 40 years later. That's all you have to do. Just somehow arrange to be born 40 years later than you were, and voila, you are beautiful. I look at pictures of me and my wife 40 years ago. Dang, we were really attractive. We still are, don't get me wrong. Especially my wife. But you know what I mean. It goes along with the old crazy expression, the beauty is wasted on the young or something like that. I don't know, something like that. And too soon, too late wise and too old, I don't know, I forget. Anyway, let's just do a little bit more in this young lady before I leave her. I almost said girl, and of course, at my age, anybody under 40 is a girl. Disrespect. No, I mean no respect, I said. I mean no disrespect. I mean no respect. Try that, lay that on somebody next time you're having a little tense moment. I meant no respect, lady. Or sir. It looks a little bit like her. Before I go, let's just block in at least some flesh tones, and then I'm going to move to another portrait. I think one of the principles, if I can call it, if I could be so pompous as to say I'm talking about principles, one of the principles I would like to convey to all of you artists, is develop an attitude of this is fun. The struggle of portraiture is fun. Now, and by that I mean the the effort is fun. Of course, it's just an absolute gas. To use a really old term, expression, it's an absolute thrill when you whoops, we just lost Facebook. Let's see if I can get them back. When you succeed at achieving a likeness, that is the part that I think you need to embrace. Are we back, Facebook? I think we are. The part that I need to, that I'm trying to, the attitude I'm trying to engender and pass on here is, even when you don't, quote unquote, succeed, let the process itself be part of the fun and the adventure. Again, if I can use a crazy or a mundane example, it's sort of like doing a jigsaw puzzle. You don't expect to do a 1,000 or 1,500 piece jigsaw puzzle in an afternoon, do you? No, it's the process is what's fun. Not finishing is not what's fun. I mean, that's fun too, but not really. And anybody who does jigsaw puzzles knows where I speak. And I'm thinking that would be a good thing for people who are just perhaps launching into their portrait career. Because I think most human beings tend to beat themselves up too much if you don't succeed. And so I hope you're getting that from these broadcasts of me doing portraits. And again, the particular trick of doing several portraits at one time, I called it in the title there, serial portraits. The trick of doing several portraits at one time really does take the perfectionistic edge, weight, burden off. Don't put the pressure on yourself to succeed. Again, like you might imagine, like the guys at the fair or on the sidewalk in Manhattan. And you and I both know if we did this full time, all day, every day, the way the guys in Manhattan do, we'd be pretty good at this, wouldn't we? But I imagine that very few people within the sound of my voice, not very many people, this is a full-time job. So you get better at what you practice. And in the meantime, if you want to start practicing, don't think you're going to hit a home run every time you step to the plate. I mentioned a while ago that I had accidentally made her waist a little too narrow. I knew that because now that I'm looking at her, now that I've done white on her dress, I'm thinking, oh, wait. I'm thinking that perhaps her entire body is actually too wide. And again, I say that because I'm looking with fresh eyes now. I haven't looked at her, haven't studied her figure, since in several days. I don't know. I'll come back and look at it with fresh eyes later. So I'm going to practice what I preach. I'm going to put this girl till we know better. Her name is Holly. Put her away, and let's pick up rights, Mom. No, let's not. Let's do this real quick. This is obviously a very different kind of portrait, quote unquote. I wouldn't call it a portrait, of course. But I put the offer out there, and one of my friends took me up on it and said, oh, yes, would you do this? I don't know, it's a niece or neighbor, who knows what. Would you do this? And my first response was, that ain't a portrait. I didn't say that out loud, of course. I could be fussy and say, no, 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 this is just for portraits. I could be fussy. Oh, I turned it wrong side up. So here's the photograph. This is heavily edited in Photoshop, but I'm ready now to start working on the girl herself and even her face a little bit. So this is going to be, obviously, has its own set of challenges. Most of the background is done. I looked at it with fresh eyes this morning and said, ooh, the sky's too dark. Easy fix, right? So I'm not too worried about that. Not worried about lightening. Not a difficult thing to lighten the sky. But in the meantime, I have done very little on the face. So let's just tackle that, shall we? Some of you might have seen last Friday, I think it was, but I'm not sure about that. It might have been Thursday night. I did use a proportional divider. That's this thing right here. I used this trick to get the approximate ratios of her body worked out. And I can still, even though I've painted over it like crazy with all my sky colors and so forth, I can still see, of course, roughly speaking. So that was a little bit of a cheat from the very beginning, using proportional divider. Very mild cheat, mind you, but a cheat nonetheless. There's a graduating scale of cheating, right? Using proportional dividers is very mild. You can use that with a live model. And strictly speaking, I say anything that you can use with a live model is not cheating. So strictly speaking, proportional divider is not. But then you go all the way up to extreme cheating, which is essentially tracing. And I will employ that if I need to. So I haven't said it this way. Perhaps you've picked up on this if you've been watching any of my portrait painting at all. I'm going to do as much of the work as I possibly can sans cheating, without any photomechanical tricks whatsoever, right? If, however, I fail to achieve what I consider to be a perfect likeness, then I'll start cheating a little. If that doesn't do the job, I'll cheat more. If that doesn't do the job, I'll cheat more. Got it? So if I need to, as I did on one of the boys, one of the little JJ or Jefferson last week, I'll go all the way up to, doggone it, print out a photograph, a print on my printer, exactly the same size as the head, trace it with a Sharpie marker on plastic, on acetate, and hold it over his face, right? So that's pretty extreme cheating. And as I said at the time, the only thing more embarrassing than having to cheat to that degree, the only thing more embarrassing than that would be releasing a painting to a client that is inadequate. That would be way more embarrassing, okay? So I don't like having to, quote unquote, cheat to that degree. But absolutely, I will do it if I have to. So it's more fun to say, whew, I did this without any. And by the way, I'm assuming that most of you understand that most of the people who do super or hyper or photographic realism in their paintings, most of those people don't mess around at all. They don't even start out with any kind of, doing it by eye, so to speak, the way I'm doing it, right? And why should they? But I'm assuming that most of you know that the hyper-realistic crowd, most of them, but I'm not saying all, but most of them don't even bother. One of the guys that comes to our painters group, a good old friend of mine named Jim, he's a little bit younger than me, not much, basically the same era as me, as I, and we love it when he comes. I don't know if you saw my grid yesterday, history and meaning. Anything, any painting, any mark inside that box is fair game. And inside the box is realism and or interesting marks. And anyway, he does literally photorealistic paintings, and they're usually huge, 4 by 6 feet, kind of huge. And the response when he brings his painting up and sets it in front of our group, we meet monthly, the response is always the same. Sheer wonderment, gasps of wonderment, myself included. Okay, I've said often one of the, if you will, dirty little secrets of the 20th century, what's his name over here? Oh, good grief. It's right in there somewhere. Clive Bell. Greenberg. One of the things he was loath to admit and would not admit was that human beings get a kick out of seeing stuff accurately rendered by a fellow human being. That mindset was thoroughly poo-pooed by most of the art movements of the 20th century and denied vociferously by most of the critics of the 20th century. But I'm very, very confident. It sounds arrogant, but it's not. They were absolutely wrong. They were just wrong. In other words, most of the art movements of the 20th century decried, bemoaned, railed against, any one of those words is appropriate, railed against realism in painting. That is one of the characteristics that all, except for photorealistic movement, that's one of the characteristics that all the art movements of the 20th century had in common. They hated realism. And of course, I think you all know that. Now, we don't hate them in return. They had some important things to say. Poor, what's his name, Greenberg. Here's my stack of Clement Greenberg. Here's the book. Clement Greenberg, Art and Culture. He was a very unhappy man. One of the reasons he was unhappy is that he spent most of his life railing against, in his case, there's no doubt it was railing against all representational art or realistic art. But in his own lifetime, popular opinion swung so wildly that during his lifetime, abstract, non-objective abstract art became very popular, and then it left him with nothing to rail against. Because most people in our society decided that he was right and that abstract art really is good. Is one kind of good art, of course, which I absolutely agree with. As you know, I do abstract painting. So that left him voiceless because he thought he was going to have nothing to do but rail at people his whole life. But lo and behold, not because of him primarily, but just because of the forces of society and culture during his own lifetime, ordinary people, ordinary uncouth redneck people out in the flyover states, to use a new term, decided that they liked abstract painting just fine. And now he doesn't ever admit this. I just think he had a terrible late midlife crisis, because lo and behold, he had nothing left to rail against, because for years he was, enjoyed being the outsider, because he assumed everybody was going to disagree with him and hate him, hate his message, that everybody agreed with him. I think that's hilarious. Some smart aleck young lady actually did a video on YouTube. I don't know how you could find it. Clement Greenberg is the name. And she does a hilarious video basically stating this reality that Clement Greenberg lost his voice in society because his voice didn't work when everybody agreed with him. Yeah, so, okay, next. Oh boy. Okay, by the way, all I'm doing here on this little girl, am I zoomed in all the way? I am not, sorry. I'll zoom in as tight as I can. Oh, I'm way out, you Facebook people. I'm sure you're being very patient with me. And YouTube people, some of you are chatting. Okay, nothing that I need to respond to. I love your chats. Nothing urgent. Let me be clear, though. One of the things that I said just a little while ago. Yeah, I haven't said it this way yet. Here it is. Here's what's, if you will, what's new, or what I'm offering that might be new to some of you. I am relieved of a lot of pressure, a lot of guilt, anxiety, when I don't pressure myself, say in this case, to nail a perfect likeness. Now you might accuse me of being mentally lazy, and I'll have to think about that, because you might be right. I don't think you are, but you might be. I'll have to consider that. But I think it's a better way to paint. I am not under a huge burden. Whoops, we just lost Facebook again. Let's see if we can. I'm not under huge pressure to get this girl exactly right, because it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. I'm going to be working on her for several different sessions, right? All I have to do is get somewhat close. Now, I'm going to use my brain and my mind and get as close as I can, so to speak. I guess I'm going to get as close as I can without blowing a gasket. Does that make sense? I'm not going to work myself into a state of discontent or unhappiness with myself. No. Long before I get to that point of being kind of grumpy about my progress, I'll say, okay, no, that's enough. I'm going to put it aside, and when I come back in a little while, I will see it with clean, fresh, new eyes. And just like everybody's had that experience, right? When you come to a painting after sleeping on it, you're working on a painting a whole bunch one day, any kind of painting, plein air, anything. And you come back to it the next day. Now, sometimes, isn't it wonderful when you walk up to your painting and you go, oh my goodness, I really like it, right? I hope you've had that experience, right? I hope you have. But honestly, most of us, that's not more often, that does happen sometimes, right? And isn't it wonderful when it does? But more often than not, what do? We walk up to a painting that we worked on yesterday or a couple days ago, and we go, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? look at, that's off, that's off, that's off, that we're pointing to different parts of the painting and saying and recognizing all these different aspects of it are erroneous. So by working on several portraits at one time, I can truncate that process. I can shorten it down so I don't have to sleep on, I have to put it aside till tomorrow. If I were to go back to my bride that I was working on just a while ago, if I were to go back to her right now, I would see that painting through pretty fresh eyes. But I'm not even going to do that because I'm going to work on two other portraits, three portraits, this one and Mr. and Mrs. Wright, before I go back to my bride painting. So by that time, I'll have very fresh eyes. Does that make sense? So it's really a nice way to live because I don't have to get all distraught and grumpy because I'm not measuring up to my own wishful standard there. And I fear I probably beat that concept to death, but doggone it, it felt good. Stick around for more beating subjects to death. And even right now, when I'm doing this kind of stuff, this is traditionally called blocking, right? Just massing in the major color blocks. I don't usually use the term blocking. And hello, Jeremy Neff. Good to have you on board. Thanks for saying hi. Jeremy, where are you from? I don't remember ever asking you that before. Is that privileged information? Do you let that kind of information out? I know you watch and you leave chats fairly occasionally. It's just fun. Uncle 60's in New Jersey. Barbara's in Ohio. Redina is in Vancouver. Those are some of our regulars. I'm missing a whole. Jane is in Charlotte. We have a sweet, peculiar, peculiar little community, don't we? Sweet and peculiar. That about sums it up in some way. Do a little bit of, again, sort of blocking in before I get out a tiny brush and start really trying to nail this girl's features. For a face this size, oh my goodness, absolutely, I'm going to have to use, if I want a likeness at all, I'm going to have to use a little sable brush. Part of the challenge the challenge will be a balance between capturing the likeness, and the whole painting is impressionistic, to use a loose, non-academic term. The whole painting is impressionistic, and I don't want her face to fly too far outside. I don't want this to be a little tiny bit of photorealism. That would just be inappropriate, visually inappropriate, right? So it's going to be a trick, but at the same time, my client is, I'm sure, paying me for some degree of likeness. I think the answer is going to be, I'm going to aim for a likeness within a degree of abstraction. I am going to pick up a tiny brush. I'm going to try to keep it, that is the tiny brush work, to a reasonable limit. I'm sure that's completely understandable. I don't, and I'm not going to try to, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to leave this painting, get more or less blocked in. And there's also something nice, by the way, about leaving a painting while you're still enjoying it. Put it aside while you're still enjoying it, and you're more likely, next when you see it next, when you come back, it's like, oh, yeah, this one. Oh, this was fun. Let's jump in again. I'm using my AA paint color trick. Yellow ochre is a good go-to color, paint color, for rendering blonde hair. And this girl looks to me like she has kind of strawberry blonde. So I'll be bringing a little bit more red into that. But just for what it's worth, sometimes it's nice to know a little shortcut. You know, don't mess around with a whole bunch of other stuff. Just to start out for blonde hair, just stick your brush in your yellow ochre and you're in the right ballpark. Same thing is true for brunette. Not the same color, of course. For brunette, stick your brush in raw umber. Often a very convenient shortcut just to get you started, gets you into the ballpark. See, she's already looking, what looks like she fits in with the overall painting, doesn't she? And I'm trying to get inside my client's head a little bit, which is, of course, what you really do when you're doing a commission. You can drive yourself nuts trying to do that, of course, but I'm trying to guess. What would my client like to see? She was fancying this as a portrait of, again, I keep saying niece, and I know because I know that my friend doesn't have any children, the woman I'm doing this for. At least I think not. Yeah, and if she did, they wouldn't be this age. Never mind. So I think it might be a niece. And I think my friend doesn't have any children. You're asking me, what kind of friend is it if you don't know? You know, friendly business community associate. Blah, blah, blah. Greet joyfully by name kind of friend. One of those. I guess you could figure that out from my conversation, couldn't you? Right now I'm just erasing, quote unquote, getting rid of some of the leftover bits of outline that are still visible from that process. All right, good enough. Now I'm ready for a fresh challenge. And I think when I come back to this girl, actually I'm going to make a change right now. I'm going to make this part of her leg a little bit fatter. There we go. When I come back to this girl, I think I'll be happy to see her again, be like an old friend, and I'll be happy to start working on it again. All right, now, Jim and Sally. Okay, bear with me just a minute here. I'm going to have to raise my easel up a little bit. All right, so when I looked at this painting with fresh eyes this morning, part of me went, gulp. Oh, rats. I says to myself, oh, rats. Because, again, because I was seeing it with fresh eyes, so I could see my mistakes immediately. I'm creeping my way up toward a pretty good likeness of Jim. I can see him already. And actually, this looks like Sally, too. But here's the bad news. They are no longer the same size. Oh, doggone it, I says to myself. And just by way of information, I mentioned this already today. getting 2 portraits on one canvas is more than twice as difficult as doing 1 portrait, because you have to get the 2 in the right relationship size-wise to each other. Whereas if it was just either one of these, her head here, this size is perfectly fine. If it was just a portrait of her, my client's not going to complain because her head's this big instead of this big. You understand? That doesn't matter. Likewise, my client's not going to complain because, but if she looks bigger than him, yeah, that's a problem. I thought, well, just for fun here, hang on, just see, let me get my, so I have several photographs. I'll use this one to start with, and I have a blown up version that's not, none of these are the right size. That would be perhaps the next cheat that I might do if I need to progress to a cheating technique on this portrait, and then I have Sally over here. The next level of cheating might be that I measure what size I want her head to be, go over to Photoshop on my computer right behind me, and print out. Whoops, we seem to have lost Facebook again. Hang on, let me see if I can get her. No sound. Uh-oh. Thank you, Bill. You're right. How could I? Okay, bear with me, everybody. I need to try to get my sound going again. Okay, first of all, I think YouTube, I think you have sound, right? Okay, bear with me just a minute here. Okay, Facebook, do we have sound now? We do not. Hang on. Jeremy's from Medford, Oregon. How fun. Okay, just a minute, Facebook, and to see if we have sound. All right, Facebook, I think we have sound, do we? Oh. Hang on, YouTube, I'm sorry for the... All right, Facebook, do we have sound now? I think we do. Whew, okay. All right, so what am I going to do here? I have a real problem on my hands. Do we have sound on Facebook yet? One of you, if you don't mind, one of you who's watching Facebook, let me know. Give me a quick thumbs up or thumbs down about sound. Jeremy, I don't know if you heard me say, good to hear you're from, fun to hear that you're from Oregon. Bless you guys. Or boy, it's not late out there, is it? Middle of the afternoon. Let's do a size comparison. Jim's head is right at just under 4 inches, and Sally's, oh, let's do size of Jim's face is 3 inches, and the side of Sally's face is 3 inches if we go from crown down to here. Okay, so his face is 4 1/4. Hers needs to be, oh my goodness. I've gotten way too big. Oh boy. Now, here's where somebody on Facebook, if you don't mind, give me a chat. Bill told me a little while ago you didn't have sound, and I think I fixed. No, we don't have sound again. Let me leave a chat.
broadcasting right
Yes,
now?
I am.
Okay, do you want us to go ahead and start without you?
Sure, I'll be there in a minute.
Okay.
Hang on just a minute, guys, and I'm sorry for you you YouTube people that are having to put up with all this. We try to rescue our Facebook people one more time. All right, so I have discovered, much to my chagrin, that dear Sally, these are also friends of mine, friendly acquaintance that I recognize and greet by name kind of friends. Anyway, she is her face has gotten too big for her britches. She's got, she's got too big. I have a tool here. Okay, Facebook, I think we have sound now. Let me know if we do. All right, I have a tool, a very, very, very mild cheat. I've showed it to some of you before if you're watching. It's simply a piece of plexiglass, 1/2 inch thick or 3/8, onto which I have inscribed very carefully lines, parallel and vertical, parallel, horizontal, vertical lines. And now let's find out. I'm going to find out her middle of her pupil lines up with Jim's nostril. Let's see how that goes. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so that's not right. So let's do the bottom of her chin lines up with the tip of his bow tie. Ooh. Okay, so the first question I had was, well, her head's too big. Is it too big this way, or too big this way? And for starters, I'm going to raise her chin, which is probably a little more fun, what's the word, emotionally, because this will make the interaction between the two of them just a little bit more direct or intense if she is, lifting her head to look at her husband who is taller. As you can see, I'm making very bold, broad corrections at the moment, not gentle little refinements. It's not a time for gentle refinements. Okay, let me check on the height of her eye now. Her eye, his nostril. Let's do the top of her forehead. Lines up with the outside of his eyebrow. Oh yeah. Now, all of that is assuming that he's correct, of course, and he is not absolutely correct yet. Let's find a measurement that I like better than his eyebrow. Let's go. His right eye catches her right in the middle of the forehead. Ooh. And now, of course, I need to paint with some flesh color because I'm just getting a great big mess of colors here. So and all of a sudden I need to mix up some green to carve up the bottom of her chin. Now, I say to myself, and I say to you, try not to panic during the intermediate ugly phases. Okay? Don't let yourself get grumpy. And I know whereof I speak because first of all, I'm tempted to do it myself. But I've seen other artists have sort of a little hissy fit because their painting goes through an ugly phase. It's process, ladies. It is process, ladies and gentlemen. Don't get all upset because you're going through an ugly phase. It's just a phase. Don't worry about it. Right? I think we have sound on Facebook now, right? A little bit more. One of the objectives, if you're again, I'm speaking to people like myself who are fairly early in their portrait journey. I'm not talking to consummate professionals. One of the objectives, one of the tasks that we face is try to develop a catalog, if you will, of our typical mistakes. If you can know the kinds of mistakes you're inclined to make more than once, that's a great benefit. By the same token, you can begin to make a list of things that you tend to get correct. And I think I can say that one of the things that I'm tending to do better, because I think I've learned, I have lots of other things that I'm bad at. That's not the subject. What am I getting better at? And for me, I think it is the philbum, the distance between the bottom of the nose and the top of the top lip. I think that's an area that I habitually spend much time focusing on. Therefore, I tend to see my mistakes quickly. One of the areas where I still struggle with, and see, it's almost more important to know where your mistakes are. What kinds of things you tend to screw up on is even more important than what you get correct. Now, again, I'm not worrying about the fact that my dear lady here is going through a horrible phase of ugly. Just don't worry about it. Just don't panic. Just keep going. It's a process. We have a long ways to go. But one of the areas where I tend to mess up still is the distance from the either end of the eyebrow or end of the eye to the front of the ear. That distance right there. I tend too often to diminish that. That's a common mistake that I have. And that's really a good thing to know, because if it's a mistake I'm likely to make, I want to know about it. Does that make sense? I think it does. And it helps me to know where my errors tend to show up. All right, but I have been called for supper, and they've already started without me because I'm hanging out with you guys. But that does have its limits, doesn't it? Okay, that again, there's so much wrong here, but again, I'm not going to worry about it. In fact, you know what I am going to do? I'm going to fuzz out her eye, not out of anger. Don't do that routine. I've seen that many times. Probably done it too many times. Don't do that exasperated, little temper tantrum thing. That's rarely productive. I live with 4 young grandchildren in the house. I see that lived out in front of me on a daily basis. How's that working for you, sweetie pie? Mouth up a little bit. Well, when I come back, I'm going to remeasure, start comparing the size of Jim to the size of Sally, and I'm going to try to keep on working without needing to do any cheating. So we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, I'm going to go have supper. Thanks for your company. I hope to broadcast again a little bit later this evening. We'll see whether that happens or not. Hard to tell. I'm not always a master of my own time. Love you guys. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.